So in 2008, I was a student at Bradley University, just up the street from here. And I was in an advanced web design course. I was having to go through and create basically our own CMS from scratch. We learned PHP and MySQL. We wrote all the queries. We did all of that. And about halfway through the semester, the professor said, okay, now that you know why you should never try to build your own CMS from scratch, we're all going to do what everyone else in the industry does. And you can pick one of whichever CMS you want. And we're going to spend the rest of the time in class learning how to use that tool and basically building the same fake website for a fictional company. So we all had the same company name, and we all had the task of building a website for this company. And he said, at the end of the semester, when we have the final exam, we'll all show off our sites and kind of see how they're different and learn a little bit about the different CMSs and all that stuff. And the person who has the top Google result when I search for that company name gets bonus credit. So I'm like, all right, I know what I'm going to do. And WordPress was a very logical choice. It makes a lot of sense. It's an easy CMS to use, and it's easy to pick up, and you can do quite a lot out of the box. So you might be wondering why I picked Drupal. Well, literally everyone else in my class chose WordPress, and even I was considering using WordPress. But my professor, I was kind of friends with him, and he pulled me aside and said, listen, it's going to be harder, but I think you'd really enjoy Drupal. I've been trying it myself. I would be willing to mentor you. Like, let's work on this together, and we'll build an awesome website. And so that's how I got started. My name is David Needham. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon. We are a website operations platform. Basically, we provide Drupal and WordPress hosting. It's fully optimized for performance and security and sales pitch there. But if you want to talk more about Pantheon or anything like this, feel free to come and meet up with me after the talk or at the party. I live in Champaign, Illinois, so just up the road a little bit. And I enjoy my job because I get to sit between the developers that work at Pantheon and the developers that are actually out in the community using our platform and the tools. So I get to create training curriculum and lead training workshops, and then ultimately go to conferences and camps just like this and talk about things that I'm really passionate about. So it's a pretty cool job. All right, so let me start just by explaining what Drupal is. So Drupal started in the year 2000. It was created by a man named Dries Biertaert, and he was in Belgium. He was actually a student, and this was back in 2000. It was before Facebook. It was before MySpace. Drupal was basically created as the first social network. So Drupal was created by Dries for him and his friends to be able to talk about what they're up to that weekend, to be able to share photos of food that they're eating, which apparently has been around for quite a while. It's going to be a place for them to say, hey, I'm going to check out this thing, do you want to come? And people to share, and all those things that you'd expect from a typical social network. Well, he open sourced his software. It became popular in Europe and then eventually jumped over to the United States, where it really kind of exploded and took off. And today, if we look at the Drupal community, we're over, about 6% of the top 10,000 websites. So that's something I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. But Drupal is really intended for, I don't want to say like really big websites or really complicated websites, but I forget exactly what the quote is, but it's like for aspirational or like really ambitious websites, as I think the specific word that Dries used in a recent keynote. We're also made up of over 1 million developers. So the community, the Drupal community, is very large. We have conferences and camps all over the world, just like WordPress events. And ultimately, there's a lot of similarities between our two communities and the two content management systems that we work on. So if you want to download Drupal, if you want to check it out, you can go to Drupal.org. This is where you would go to download Drupal core, which is just like WordPress core, the software that runs the website. It's also where you'd go to grab the modules, which are basically like plugins from the WordPress community, as well as themes, and it's where you'd go to get help, to report issues, and all of those other things. There's sort of Well, there's several different changes or ways of thinking about project and about code and things in the Drupal community that is not quite the same in the WordPress community. One being Drupal.org is probably where you're going to go to get pretty much everything for your website. You're not going to see as many opportunities to go and like buy a theme or to buy a plugin or anything like that. It's sort of seen as like if you're creating something, if you're creating code for the project, you're probably going to be sharing that back, and it's going to be through Drupal.org. That's where the security audits and all those things kind of come into play, so it's the safe place to go. Drupal is free. There's several different ways to define free. In this case, free is in beer, or if you're coming to the party later, also free is in pizza. Okay. In this case, free, we mean like free, like I'm giving you this beer or this pizza or whatever. You don't have to pay anything to get it. You can take it for free. Drupal is also free as in speech. So that means you can take Drupal and use it for whatever you want. There aren't limitations on the sort of website you can build or specific use cases for it. It's just all available. You can use it in whatever way you want. Also, Drupal is free as in puppies. So we all probably have an opportunity to receive a puppy from someone. And of course, if you receive a puppy from someone, it's not just free. You know, you might get it for free, but then there's like, oh, we got to take them to the vet. You know, we've got to do checkups, and we got food. Oh, and there's playing. We got to spend time with them and actually like train them and all of that stuff. And the same is true for your website. You know, you're going to need hosting. You're going to need to do security updates at least like once a month, or some regular period of time. Backups and all of that stuff, and ongoing maintenance to create content and all of those things. So these things, Drupal is free in all these ways. WordPress is also free in all these ways. We have these things in common. They're all free. One thing that's different, though, is that Drupal is object-oriented when it comes to code. What this means is that Drupal is a lot more complicated to pick up and run with. If you decide to create a custom module, for example, you might need to understand object-oriented programming, which might require a little bit of a computer science background to really kind of wrap your head around exactly how the data structures work and how these pieces fit together. So Drupal in version 8 was rebuilt on Symfony. It's a framework for PHP. And it was quite a shift in the Drupal community, because it went from using a lot of Drupal familiar coding and all these things to switching to Symfony, where personally I don't know object-oriented programming super well. When I went to school, I was in the interactive media department. I wasn't in the computer science department. So when I have to sit down and do coding in Drupal, it's become a little bit more difficult for me. But this was done for a very good reason, and we've seen sort of a positive shift in the community, because previously, when a person wanted to hire someone like a Drupal developer, you would literally go out and see, okay, how many Drupal developers are there in the world? We need to find one that is available, that has this skill set, and on, because Drupal had a lot of coding, Drupal-specific coding standards and all these different things. So you really had to kind of have experience specifically with Drupal. However, I've heard at conferences that people that are hiring new developers are now looking for anyone that has any Symfony experience or any object-oriented programming experience. So you might have Laravel or some other framework like that. And if you understand how those frameworks work, it's much easier to kind of hit the ground running with Drupal. There's actually a story I heard at the last DrupalCon, which took place in Nashville, where a Symfony developer attended. He had never used Drupal before, had never seen the code, had never picked up and volunteered or done anything like that. He came to the conference on Contributor Day, so the day where people could volunteer and kind of help make things better. And on that day, he made a commit to Drupal core. Like, he came in with no experience whatsoever in Drupal specifically. He came in knowing only what he knew from Symfony and that background, and was able to understand what he saw and make a suggestion, make a commit that affected the entire Drupal project, which is really powerful, and I think kind of saying that this is in the right direction, or at least it's a little bit different from the WordPress community. Drupal is modular. WordPress is kind of modular too, though as I said earlier, it's called a plugin. But the ecosystem is kind of different. There isn't a store where you can go buy plugins or themes. Even the idea of selling support, there would never be the situation where I would create a module and say, if you want support for this module, you need to pay me $5 a month or $5 a year or whatever in order to receive support. Like that concept would be almost offensive to people in the Drupal community because it's seen as we've created this code, we're sharing this code, it's good to contribute this back and provide it. And there are both good and bad things about this. The good thing is that we're all collaborating on the same project. There's less fragmentation between all the different plugins. Because if I create a plugin for, let's say, turning an address into a Google map, and I go to Drupal and say, hey, I'd like to create a module that does this, they would say, wait a minute, there's like 3 other modules that already do something similar to this. Can you contribute what you're doing to one of those projects? And I'd be like, okay, sure, I'll spend my time and make those projects better. Whereas if in the WordPress community, I might have a product that I'm trying to sell through this. I might have support. I might be creating my own custom solution for a problem that has similar solutions out there. So as a result, you'll end up with lots of options, lots more options in WordPress than you would in Drupal. But the support is better, right? Because you're receiving financial motivation. You're paying for support, and so the person supporting that module is they actually have an incentive for spending time making it better, making sure it works with every version, and all those different things. So it's definitely something that's worth debating. I think having a conversation about like which way is better. As I said, there are pros and cons to both, so it kind of depends. But there's something kind of cool about like going to a Drupal conference, meeting the maintainer of a project that you've worked with, and being able to contribute to that project directly. To be able to go into the issue queue for that module that you use every day, and to be able to make suggestions and commit that back and get feedback from other people from all over the world that are working on this together. And there are similar things in the WordPress community as well. Right, Drupal is also themable. So the good thing about Drupal is that the entire editor experience is able to be customized. But the bad thing is that the entire editor experience is able to be customized. Because of this, you kind of end up out of the box when you install Drupal with it's sort of like taking that like big box of Legos and just dumping it on the floor, where you can build whatever you want with this, but out of the box, it's kind of a mess. I will not say that I'm double negative. I am a Drupal fanboy, I'll just say it. I've used Drupal more than I've used WordPress. However, the UI, the editor experience out of the box, like when you get started, is not great. There have been improvements over the years, but you have control to change every little granular detail about the front end, the back end, what different users see at different points. You can, change what fields are available. You can change permissions for specific users. And you can do all this from the UI without having to add additional plugins or modules. Also, Drupal has really strong data structures that I'll be talking about a little bit later that makes it a better candidate for like data-heavy websites. So like if you have if you're trying to build like an API, if you're trying to build a sort of website that doesn't have a typical front end, it's maybe headless or something like that, where you have a custom JavaScript front end on it, Drupal can sometimes be a better choice because of the way that the just inherent API outputs work, and the way that you can program that without having to add a bunch of extra stuff. It seems like it's a little bit more mature because the API framework has been around a little bit longer in Drupal, but that is something that has been worked on in WordPress as well. All right, so speaking of structured content, the content that you enter into a Drupal website is saved on the back end in the database in a way that just isn't the same in WordPress. It's very different. So in WordPress, you might have something called a post type. You can create a custom post type in code. You can even add custom fields with like the advanced custom field module or plugin, sorry. And you can get some of this functionality. So like over the years, the WordPress and Drupal projects sort of started at very different places, but they've been coming closer and closer together as they're learning what techniques work and kind of sharing these different ways of creating content. But the way that Drupal saves this content in the database and the way that it's intended to work out of the box is just fundamentally very different from the back-end perspective. So let's just take a look at an example. So I have a staff directory. It's a pretty simple staff directory at this point. We have a photo, we have a title, which might be the name of the person. We also have their job title or role, what they do. But there might also be a dozen or more other fields that we don't have visible in this list. We might have our own internal directory that has like phone number or email or other things like that. And we're able to customize that. We can easily say which things should or shouldn't be visible in certain areas. And we also have control over who has access to change which pieces at what point in time. So for example, each of these is a specific piece of content. We have a bio for Zach Rosen, our CEO, but Zach doesn't get on the website very much. He doesn't really, his role is such that he doesn't create a lot of content, so he may not even have an account to get into the website. That content might just exist, and the editors might take care of it for him. Now Josh, on the other hand, Josh is head of product, and he creates quite a bit of content. He writes blog posts, he updates different pages as technical specifications change on our platform. And so Josh has a login, and when he logs in, he has access to change his bio, his specific piece of content that's been created for him. And only he has access to change his, or him and the administrators. But he doesn't have access to change anyone else's information. And furthermore, he might only have access to change certain fields on his profile. So it might be embarrassing if someone just jumps in and changes their job title to something else. So maybe we block that by default, so only administrators can change that. All right, and then finally we have Matt. So Matt is the VP of Marketing. As an administrator on the website, he has access to everything. So his editor experience might be very different. When he logs in, he might have access to change any content he wants, including the way that the content's laid out. And he would have, again, a very different interface, being able to create new users, give different roles to those users, and define what permissions they have on the website. Here's another example. So this is a case study found on the Drupal.org website for the Chicago Park District. So I like this example a lot because I think it demonstrates the data structures that are available. So we have here a list of parks and facilities, and you can see a number of fields. So we have here, let's see, the name of the specific park. We have a photo. In this case, it's just a logo, which might be the default photo. We have the address. We have the phone number. And then, this is one way of displaying the content, but we also have the map display of the content. And then if you click on one of these, you'll actually get even more information. There might be a photo gallery, there might be hours, there might be the responsible administrators or whatever. There's all sorts of additional fields that are possible. And this is created so that you create the content type, you add the fields, and then you can choose how those are displayed and used throughout the website. One of the reasons why the Chicago Park District went with Drupal in this case is because they have a lot of content. They have a lot of metadata about the content that maybe isn't even visible all the time, but they need to keep track of. And a lot of this content isn't created on the website. A lot of this content is created through their event registration system, through third-party systems, APIs, scheduling, maintenance, other park administrations. And so they created it because they wanted to be able to pull in content from all sorts of different places, process it, and have a standard output of the content. They also want to be able to output this content in a number of different ways. So let me show you a quick diagram. So we have here, there's separate event system in the cloud, some other third-party system. It's probably outputting JSON or something, some sort of a feed. All that content is being imported into the database via the Drupal migrate. And once it's in the database, it's also intermingling with the content that's being created or edited by people on the website, the editors, content creators. And those people also have permission or access to go in and maybe audit the content that's being pulled in. So if they want to fix a typo or something, they can do that. And then once this is saved and all kind of put in together. That gets published out on the website where everyone on the public can see it, but it also gets passed out via the REST API to their mobile app. So automatically, whether you're on your mobile app or your phone or your computer or wherever, all the content from all over these different systems is getting pulled into a central place, into the website, and then outputted in the different locations it needs to go. So Drupal has been a popular choice for museums, lots and lots of works of art and things like that, and other systems that have lots of data that needs to be processed or analyzed or just generally kept track of, managed. Drupal is also really powerful because it has a built-in query builder. So who here knows how to write a database query from scratch? All right, so there's, I don't know, like 10 people or so that raised their hand. Who here feels like they could point and click, maybe like write a sentence that describes what they would like to return? So you'd say like, imagine this list we have back here. Who here feels like they could say, or let me just not ask you, but say it. Imagine you have this list here, and you could say something like, I want to see a list of parks sorted by alphabetical title. Show me the top 5, and I want to see the title and the photo and the address. Okay, so let's just say that's a sentence. You can say it, and if you can say it, you can probably use Drupal's UI to build the query. So you don't have to write the query yourself. You can just click buttons and have it return the results. This is really powerful for non-coders. This is maybe the one thing that Drupal is really good at for non-coders that I feel like WordPress is not quite there yet. There's some plugins that are trying to do stuff like this. But again, the back end of WordPress is very different, so it's a little bit more difficult. Let me show you what it looks like. The interface is also maybe not super great out of the box. However, you're able to say things like, how am I displaying this content? I want to see a list of published testimonials on our website. I want it sorted by the author, or the date that it was authored on. And I just want to see an unformatted list. So just a list of divs, basically. And I want to see the full content. You can also say, because this is a page, that I want to see it at this URL with that menu. And I want to make sure that only people that can view published content can actually view this. Oh, and I only want to see 10 of them with a little mini pager so you can click through them. Okay, so all you have to do is go and say this. You click the buttons, you make choices based on what you want to see, and that automatically generates, in this case, we'll have a full page where this shows up at that URL, as well as a block, which will be the little piece of content that shows up on the sidebar or footer or some other place in the content on our page. And we can create as many of these as we want and a number of different formats. So a few examples. So we were talking about that testimonial view. Imagine we have the view. Within that view, we have a display for a slideshow, where maybe we have a testimonial slideshow with here's the content, there's the author of the content, their organization that they're with. And we can see this has been formatted. Maybe you put this on the front page or somewhere. It's a display in slideshow format. We also have a page display where maybe we can let people see all of the testimonials about all of our services or products or whatever all in one place, and that shows up at a specific URL. We might also have a latest testimonial where this is, we say it's kind of like this one, but we only want to see one. And we want to show this in a block so we can put it on the sidebar of maybe every page. And then, because this is Drupal, because the entire interface is customizable, we can also create an administration table to make it easy for our users, our editors, who are actually editing the content. So we can create a table that shows up on the back end, so when someone logs in, if they are in charge of managing the testimonial content, they'll see this list, and they can bulk edit, bulk publish, unpublish, find it all, sort it all, change it all, whatever they want to do. So this feature, it's referred to as views in Drupal. Because of views, because of this query builder, you're able to do very, very dynamic websites relatively quickly. So just as another case study, we have the Hong Kong Trade Development Council website. They chose Drupal in this case because, well, partly multilingual stuff and the ability to say, I want to allow my content creators to create content, and then have that notify my content editors, who then can approve it or reject it and send it back, and kind of this complicated publishing process, moderation process. As well as the integration with third-party systems. They also were pulling in from a bunch of different places. And then they use a ton of views. So here's their front page. You can see they actually have 6 views here that we're viewing. And of those views, this is basically their entire front page. It's all dynamic content being pulled in automatically. So the first view there is a slideshow. The second view is a what's new section. We also have a section here for the kind of big image with the latest insight, which is kind of like a news article, and then a bunch of other teaser ones. We have a section here then for case references, which is formatted totally different. It's just one, but it looks like it's also a slideshow. And then we have a view down here for latest investment projects, and then expert advice. So they're using, their entire front page here is dynamic content. All that their content editors or content creators have to do is log in, create content, click save, and it will show up on the website where it needs to go based on how it was configured. This is extremely powerful, but it's part of the reason why Drupal is a lot more complex. All right, so I think it's important to get out and check out other communities. I sort of have my feet in both communities at the moment. I mentioned at that turning point in my class, I had was leaning towards WordPress, decided to go Drupal, and most of my experience now is in Drupal. However, since starting at Pantheon, and actually even a couple of years before that, I've been using WordPress a lot too. Our communities are much more similar than they are different. So let me just share some places that you can get in touch with the Drupal community and maybe be exposed to some other technologies, some other communities. So there's this website called Drupal. Oh, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but you can actually grab these slides here, davidneedham.me/WCPIA2018. It's where you can go to grab these if you need them, so you can click any links. But from the Drupal website, you can see all the events that are happening all over the world. The one most relevant to us here right now is DrupalCorn, which is coming up in September 27th. It's a relatively medium-sized, on the larger side of Drupal camps happening in Iowa. And then later next year, there's another one in Chicago called MidCamp. If you are interested, definitely check it out. I will be at those events most likely. Oh, I may not be at DrupalCorn. I'll definitely be at MidCamp though. And so I like to think of visiting a new open source community, like getting out and visiting WordPress, or getting out and visiting Drupal, or getting out and visiting Joomla, sort of like visiting a new country. When you go on your vacation to Europe or to Japan or wherever it is that you're going that's different, your eyes sort of become opened to things that you never considered. You see things from a different perspective, and you end up coming up with creative ideas, creative solutions to problems that you hadn't really even considered before. So I'd encourage you to go check out a different community. It doesn't have to be Drupal. It could be, like I said, Joomla or Node or whatever you want it to be. But don't feel like I do WordPress, I don't do that. It's not for me, I'm not going to go. Because you end up with talks just like this. Also, last week I was giving a talk that was all about visual regression testing. Now, visual regression testing is really great, but it's not specific to any CMS at all. There's also, I attended a talk last week about marketing that had nothing to do with Drupal at all. So if you go to these events, you'll be exposed to different communities, different perspectives, and have opportunities to see things and learn things that you wouldn't get necessarily from just one community. All right, so in conclusion, that website that I built, that Drupal website that I mentioned at the very beginning in that story, well, I ended up getting the top ranking in Google when it was searched for. I'm very proud of the website because I built a fully functioning e-commerce website. And this is before WooCommerce was possible in WordPress. And so I actually was able to demo on site where you type in a credit card and check out and go through shipping estimation and all that stuff without as much work as I expected. And I continue to get inquiries from people saying, hey, I want to buy this thing on your website. So I eventually had to shut down the website because I couldn't bear to tell them that hoverboards aren't real yet. but people were very excited. Anyway, so again, my motivation isn't to convert you. I'm not here to tell you that you should be using Drupal and WordPress is terrible. I'm here to really point out that our communities are more similar than they're different. Over the years, we've shared, we've borrowed different technologies and techniques from each other. So, Drupal has had content types in core for many, many years. WordPress, after that, picked up post types and advanced custom fields, and so we're sharing these ideas back and forth. WordPress Gutenberg is coming out, right? Whenever it comes out, to be determined. Well, there was a talk at the last Drupal event I went to. There is now a Gutenberg module for Drupal. The Gutenberg project is open sourced, and it's been converted to work with Drupal now. All right, so we're like taking all these technologies. We are very, very similar projects, and so I think it's very exciting. So I hope that our communities can really become stronger by working together. That we can kind of spur each other on like siblings, like encouraging each other to do a little bit better than we might be inclined to do by default, and really inspire each other to kind of go above and beyond what we would typically think to do. But thank you very much. Question?
Yeah, what does the editor look like in Drupal right now? Is it like tiny CE similar to WordPress, or like what is it? What is that kind of like?
Yeah, it's not pretty. By default, it's CK editor for like a body field, a description field. But it can be very different because you have a lot more options by default. You have a lot more fields to deal with. So yeah.
Drupal will be better or what?
It'll be better. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and there are other plugins, kind of like the page builders we have in the WordPress community. There's like paragraphs in Drupal, and there's actually a new layout builder that's recently put into core in Drupal core. So it's to be determined, like which solution is best and will win in the end. And yeah, we'll see. Question?
So you're starting a new project, and you have to decide between Drupal or WordPress. Why would you choose one or the other in either direction?
Great question. So you're starting a project. Do you choose Drupal or WordPress, and how do you know? My answer used to be, if you're writing a blog, do WordPress if you're not doing Drupal. And I think that's not a good opinion anymore. It's just not true. WordPress can do so much more, so much easier now, that I would almost go the opposite direction, where like if, by default, I'd probably lean towards WordPress. If you have a project that, kind of like those case studies where you have like lots and lots of content, you have data that you need to analyze and output in sorts of different ways. If you need to customize the editor experience very, very specifically, to say you have lots of users and they output things in different ways or they see things in different places, then in that case, Drupal would be a good project. If you have that like big, ambitious sort of website. But otherwise, yeah, I would say probably start with WordPress. Some of the differences I've seen in doing just the little bit of like development I've done in those communities is WordPress has a lot of plugins, and the plugins will give you a lot of the functionality that you're looking for. But the point at which you need to do something that's not out of the box, where you need to start doing custom code, the Drupal community can be easier. But again, you end up with like now that Symfony is a thing and object-oriented programming, and it can be, it's complicated. It's like Drupal is doing it the more textbook correct way, but WordPress is a much stronger focus on, easier, democratized publishing, much easier for content creators, and so it's just different priorities, but we both have essentially the same goal. Yeah.
So, David, in the WordPress world, one often encounters child themes. In Drupal, do you extend classes? How do you do something similar to that, so that when aspects are upgraded, you're not overwriting your changes?
Yes. So the question was, there's in WordPress you have the concept of child themes, and how do you do something equivalent in Drupal without overwriting changes? So there's also the concept of child themes in Drupal. It's just in the theme you would define what your parent theme is, and you can chain as many of those as you need to, and they just inherit.
thing that I've noticed in the WordPress community with premium versus free for plugins and themes is when they're free, sometimes they get abandoned because there's no incentive for the developer to
Right.
keep advancing it. Is that a problem with Drupal when everything is free? Or does
Yeah.
it kind of get forked?
Right. So the question is, in the WordPress community, if you have a free plugin, then sometimes it might get abandoned. Is something, is that a common problem in Drupal since everything is free? Well, yes and no. So because you have the community aspect and you're encouraged to participate with existing plugins, most plugins and themes have at least two authors, two contributors at any one point. And so sometimes modules or themes are abandoned, especially as we go from like one strong version to another version. But in many cases, someone will step up and pick it up and say, I'm the maintainer now, and they'll run with it. That's probably more common than like forking the project, but that also happens sometimes. So I'd say it happens probably less because there's probably more than just one person who has skin in the game who's like actively contributing. So yeah, but it depends.
Last time I looked at Drupal, a lot of the complaints from people were like, Drupal is a new version, now I have to rewrite our entire site. And WordPress in particular is like almost obsessive about backwards compatibility. So
Right.
is that still as stark of a difference, or WordPress is now getting worse about that because of Gutenberg and all that stuff? And is Drupal getting better with that, or is it still like a major
Yeah.
means it's going to be a major rebuild?
Right, so the question was about backwards compatibility. Yeah, it's still a problem. So as you go from like Drupal 6 to 7, 7 to 8, eventually 8 to 9, which will happen in 2020, you can't just click upgrade and go. Like it often you have to migrate like from one site to the other, or like install, create a new website from scratch, which of course is never fun. There has not been the strength or the emphasis on backwards compatibility between major versions, but because of Symfony and like the way that it's interesting, like the Drupal community and the WordPress community sort of swapped with I'm forgetting exactly what is it, like semantic versioning, where you have like planned releases and certain things, and then so Drupal adopted that at the same time WordPress adopted the it's ready when it's ready. Which is kind of funny that like we saw this is better, and anyway, and I think that plays into this a little bit too.
Are there still security updates for major versions that aren't the current one?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Are there security updates available for the non-major version right now? So at any given point in the Drupal community, we support 2 versions. So right now, 8 is the main version. It's actively receiving new features and things like that. The Drupal 7 is sort of the long-term support version that will continue to receive security updates and support throughout the life of Drupal 8. I think I think it's supposed to be like when Drupal 9 is fully released, then support for Drupal 7 will go away. However, Drupal 6 is technically not supported, but still being supported. So, and there's a lot of people that say, I don't want to upgrade because I have to rebuild my site. So there are companies out there that provide support and then continue to do support basically, and then provide those support patches back to the community. So there's still financial incentive to keep old versions running securely. All right, so no one's asked this yet, but someone asked this at a previous time I've given this talk, and I mean to add it to my slides, and I keep forgetting. The question is, what is my favorite new feature in Drupal 8? Now that it's come out. And my favorite feature, I had to think about this for a while, but my favorite feature is configuration management. The way that this works, the thinking is, what do you do when you have a development server and a live server? And you're working on functionality, I'm adding a content type and I'm adding fields and I'm changing the way these fields work, and I click save. Okay, now what happens when I want to move that to my live website? Well, in most, before Drupal 8 and in WordPress, you might have to redo that work. You might have to go and say, okay, I created, this one and that one, and I did this one and that one. Or you might have to create a script from scratch that says, here's the database changes that I need to make on the live site. Or you need to overwrite the live database with your dev database, which if you're actively adding new content is a terrible idea because you'll lose that content. Well, in Drupal 8, there's a new configuration management system which exports configuration to YAML. And so basically all of your configuration can be exported to code, which means you benefit from version control for your code. So you can say, here's all my configuration, here's a commit, with all these changes I've made. I can then roll those back or back them up, do whatever I need to. And then I can deploy those changes out to my live site, import the configuration, and it just works. Like there's no, oh no, I overwrote the database, or oh no, this feature didn't work the same way. Like everything just works. And if you want to check that out in WordPress, there is a plugin called WPCFM for configuration management, WPCFM. It will do some of the database configuration, so you can take some of it out into code and deploy that out, but it makes a huge difference, especially if you're working on a team. All right. Thank you all very much.